Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank the East Mentorship Committee and the AAST and Surgical Critical Care Program Directors Society for the opportunity to organize a great webinar for today. We'll be talking about the principles of being a great leader. My name is Fariha Sheikh. I am trauma faculty at Rutgers New Jersey Medical School in Newark, New Jersey. Emily?
Hi. I'm Emily Grimsley. I'm a PGY4 general surgery resident at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I'm currently out on a research fellowship using big data to study surgical outcomes. After training, I plan to pursue a career in academic trauma and acute care surgery with a focus on teaching. So our first presenter today is going to be Dr. Lillian. She is the professor and division chief of acute care surgery at McGovern Medical School at the University of Texas Health Center at Houston. She's the endowed Jake H. Mayfield Chair in Surgery, and she is Vice Chair for Quality for the Department of Surgery. She is faculty for the Master's Program in Clinical Research at UT Health, and she is the co-founder and co-director for the Center of Surgical Trials and Evidence-Based Practice. Dr. Kao is also active in a number of national organizations. She's a past president of the Association for Academic Surgery and the current Quality Pillar Lead and Vice Chair for the American College of Surgeons Board of Governors. She is the social media editor and deputy editor for the Journal of the American College of Surgeons, and she sits on 5 other journal editorial boards. Dr. Kao's interests include quality improvement to ensure equitable care, dissemination and implementation of research, and development of a learning healthcare system and learning healthcare scholars.
And we also have Dr. Niels Martin with us today. He is the Vice Chair for Diversity and Inclusion in the Department of Surgery, Section Chief of Surgical Critical Care, Program Director for the Traumatology and Surgical Critical Care Fellowships, and also an Associate Professor in Surgery at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the Medical Director of the Trauma and Surgical Intensive Care Unit at the Penn Presbyterian Medical Center and the Donor Management Center at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. He's a board-certified diplomat of the American Board of Surgery for both surgery and surgical critical care. He's a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and a fellow of the American College of Critical Care Medicine. He's also been formally included in over 15 funded grants, many as primary investigator. He's presented his research to numerous national and international organizations and is published in a variety of prominent medical journals. Currently, he has well over 100 peer-reviewed publications. In addition to Dr. Kao and Dr. Martin, we also have Dr. Flanagan joining us. So Dr. Molly Flanagan is Assistant Professor of Surgery at University of Virginia Health in Charlottesville, Virginia. She is Associate Program Director for the General Surgery program and is the physician lead for trauma performance improvement. She's an active East member and is chair of the mentoring committee. And with that, we'd like to get started. Dr. Kao has sent her presentation to us because she could not be present for the webinar. So we'd like to start with that first. All right, how about if we can't get the volume to work just yet, Dr. Martin can start with his presentation and we can revisit Dr. Kao's presentation.
Okay, great. Let me just get going here. All right, you guys seeing my slides?
Yes.
Great. Well, I am really honored to have been asked to give a talk on leadership. I certainly have enjoyed the many roles that I have played within Penn Medicine and within our various relevant societies. And I think a lot of that has given me a pathway to leadership qualities that have gotten me to where I am today. And so hopefully, as we talk through this, I can kind of relay to you a little bit of my path as well. I have a few disclosures, but nothing that really is relevant to this job. I will disclose that my views are my own and that I actually enjoy what I do. And I think that's a big part of leadership, is really actually enjoying that component of your career. And so the next little while, what I hopefully intend to do is give you a few characteristics of what I think makes a good leader. And there are many of them, but go through several of them and then talk a little bit about how leadership is really a learned ability that's based on your exposures and your experiences, and that really helps mold your leadership style along with your personality. And then I was asked to kind of, finish with talking a little bit about my journey in who I am, and really where the leadership aspects have kind of come to play, and where the areas of my exposure have laid in terms of becoming the leader that, or at least the leadership qualities that I have today. And so the first thing I think when we talk about leadership is to recognize that it's really not a title. It's not some role that you play. It's really how you approach everything that you do in a fashion that is conducive to not just really your best outcome, but the greater good of your group, of your practice, of your division, etc. And it's really a lived experience and a lived part of who you are, not just a component of your day, or again, a component of a title. And so with that being said, there's always the discussion about, are leaders really made, or is there such thing as a born leader? There are people who talk all the time about how, well, my kid's a born leader. He's always the captain of his pickup basketball team or what have you. And whereas I think that there are some leadership traits that can be innate, in order for those things to develop, you really need to have a lot of introspective reflection on who you are, the skills that you have, and how you utilize those skills in your everyday practice, in your interactions, in your ability to communicate, collaborate. And that's really where, when you talk about folks who are true experts in leadership, they tell you that leaders are truly made, and it's made based on those learned experiences that have allowed also for introspective review of what you've gotten out of those experiences, and how that makes you a better leader, and how you incorporate those experiences into the way in which you function in the professional world. And so as a learned ability, the question is, well, how do you learn it? And yes, there are absolutely ways to go to special training, and a lot of our societies have leadership courses and experiences, and your institution may have leadership courses, which are great, but they only really provide you with a base and a construct to move forward. And a lot of who all of us learn in terms of how to become a leader, or lead in whatever fashion that means, right? We're not just talking about who is our chair, who is our dean, but in so many ways, we all are leaders, whether it's in the operating room, or in the trauma bay, or of a research project, or of a committee. Each of these experiences provide exposure into who we become. And again, as I mentioned before, that exposure must be followed by personal reflection and allowing yourself to grow as a leader, by reviewing and understanding what those experiences have given you retrospectively. And so learning by doing, I think, is the greatest way to be exposed to various roles. And when I say learning by doing, it's learning by service, by serving your team in some capacity or another, whether it's taking charge of a PI project and learning how to interact with the larger health system around you, or the structural processes within your institution on a committee. All of these things provide you with tremendous exposure into how the corporate world, the professional world work. And having that understanding really, I think, provides a big part of the tenets of leadership. It's not just your personality and approach to guiding others, but it's also your skill set and your experience. As you talk about leadership on a larger level, you really need to have an understanding of what are clinical operations, research and academic processes, how we interact as surgeons with the larger hospital, health system, etc. There's so much of a separation between what clinicians do and what hospital operations do. You can't just hire a surgeon because your group is working hard if it doesn't really fit within the needs of the hospital or health system. And so there has to be an understanding on both sides. And that is something that you develop over time by being involved and by providing that service. And so learning by doing, I think, is the easiest way to continue to bolster your skill set. Again, as long as you're able to reflect throughout that process on who and what you are learning. And so a lot of folks like to focus on the traits of leadership and the qualities that a good leader has. And here are just a few that are listed, and you can pull a million of these things off of the internet in terms of what leadership qualities are felt to be valuable in order to have a team become an optimized resource. And these things really, it helps if they become part of who you are and the way in which you think, that you really need to be committed to the process. You need to be honest with all of those that you work for, whether it's someone who you're reporting to or folks who you work underneath you. And not that you have to have the perfect set of qualities. I think it's also really important to understand where your shortcomings are. If you get stressed out over finances, let's say, well, then you need to create avenues and a support structure to help you in that spot, and not just kind of allow that to be your one failure point. And so really understanding these things, and as we'll talk about, building the right team around you is extremely important as you become a leader in whatever fashion is most valuable to you. The other piece of it out there is many of us come with preconceived expectations of what it means to be a leader. And one of the biggest things that I think hinders some folks is not checking their ego. This being in a leadership role is much less about you and much more so about what you can offer to a much larger group of folks, whether it, again, is your local team or if you're leading an organization or society. It is really about the betterment of whatever group you work for. And so you really need to check your self-interests. When it's about you and your advancement, that becomes very blatantly obvious and will actually hold up your advancement as a leader, because people recognize that, and they recognize that you're not really after the greater good. And so you really need to be able to check your ego and work for a team. And so what kind of team, how do you create that team? Here's a picture of the dream team, which might have been the greatest 5 basketball players ever to be together on a court. But we all need to create that team around us. No leader has every single skill. No leader understands every single component of every decision that they'll ever have to make. And so you need to build a team around you. It's not just your peers. It's those who report to you, who can be the boots on the ground, who give you the insight that you need to make a decision. And it's those who've come before you. It's those who support you from above who also need to be part of your team. You need to surround yourself with the best people, and you have to listen to them. And that's some of the best advice that's ever been given to me, is to listen and listen to the people who really are going to provide you that value. I had the pleasure of listening to a talk from Colin Powell on leadership a few years ago, and he rambled off a list of components that he thought was really important for leaders to have as well. And so I'll just kind of leave you with that list of intelligence and judgment, the ability to anticipate what's coming next, a team that's going to be loyal to you in that they trust you and you trust them, with a level of integrity that allows for open communication. Again, the ego piece, and a real drive to get things done. And when you can select folks like that to surround you, it just makes you and them better. The sum of the parts, is not even equal to the value you get from a great team. That's much, much larger. So how do you make decisions then within that team construct as a leader? I think you really do need to spend the time to understand the problems and issues that you're dealing with as a leader. You can't just come up with leadership mantras and phrases. And, there's some memes on the internet about, someone going on for 5 minutes and they've spoken nothing but leadership jargon and have actually had no content underneath it. You really, have to use the right tools at the right time with a real full understanding of what you're working on. And you really need to be able to then break it down, simplify it for those that you're reporting to, those that are helping you make a decision, and those that decision is going to affect. When everyone can understand it, I think you're going to have the best outcome. You're going to have the best buy-in from the decisions that you make. Emotional intelligence, I think, is a really important part of the personality trait of also being a good leader. You really need to be able to read your team, read those that you work with, and have the level of social skills to be empathetic when needed, to motivate when needed, to help, not just those around you, but even yourself. You need to be self-aware and self-regulate the way in which you interact with your team, because that may be different under different circumstances. How you approach a difficult conversation is going to be very different than how you approach a conversation over new processes in your practice pattern. And so having the emotional intelligence to interact with your team in a meaningful way, I think, is also a really important part of leading a team. And I think you have to sort of be prepared for some of the other aspects of being a leader. You really need to shoulder the responsibility and manage the decisions that you make. Harry Truman said this buck stops here, or the buck stops with the leader. You ultimately make those tough and unambiguous choices as a leader. Even in an open and collaborative fashion with your support staff and with those that you lead, you still shoulder those responsibilities. And sometimes folks describe that as being lonely. I don't know if it's truly being lonely, but there are books labeled "It's Lonely" at the top. But you do have to be prepared for how things will change. I remember 8 years ago when I took over the fellowship program. I used to love hanging out with the fellows and hearing what things they did the night before and what procedures they did. And almost overnight, when I became fellowship director, they stopped kind of popping into my office spontaneously because I now had that leadership role. And that was something that I had to accept, and I was happy with, because I got to interact with them on a different level that also had a lot of meaning for me. But those transitions do happen as you take on leadership roles. And I think that you have to be fine with that. You have to understand that responsibility, and it should not be a stressor to you to have to make those leadership responsibilities. I think if it's anxiety provoking, then maybe you need to be more introspective of yourself and decide if a certain particular leadership role is the right one for you. We're all built differently. We all have things that we enjoy and things that we don't enjoy. And I think we need to think it's not just, again, about a title. It's about how well you will deal with that title. And is that something that you can do in the long run? And so I think recognizing this is an important thing. And so I'm going to, finish this quickly by going through some slides about my own pathway. And again, this really is not about me, but it's about, I think, the growth that I have achieved over my career and what aspects have allowed for that growth to take place. These are really just my pathway. There are many pathways to leadership and to learning how to lead. I think that the pathways often are based as much on the opportunities presented to you as your resolve to seek them out. And I will say, I'm not perfect, and I'm still absolutely learning leadership traits as I move along my pathway and get involved in different things. But these are the things that I've done. And so, I started off in a high school that had a lot of mottos that I think, pushed towards leadership. It was a college prep school that, had models like, whatever hurts my brother hurts me. It was an all boys school, and it was a little bit, but it was great. And although I think, might be a little controversial today, they also had a motto like, that Benedict hates a quitter, and, that you needed to have that strive and that perseverance to always keep moving forward. And when I reflect back on my time at the school, those are some of the things that still stand out today that created a little bit of the drive of who I am today. I went to Rutgers for undergrad. I met, amazing physician there who got me plugged in with a couple pathways along the pre-med tract that allowed me to do some research. And one of the things that I realize now is just how organized this guy was, Kamal Khan, and that level of organization to move folks through with milestones was eye-opening. And whereas I entered college saying, yeah, I think I want to be a doctor, but I couldn't really justify that with any real experiences, the pathway that this mentor of mine set out was extremely helpful. And when I think today about pathways, and today when I sit down with our fellows and we talk about academic roadmaps, it started with the way in which this guy created a roadmap for me to, truly justify my decision to go into medicine. And so I did go to Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson for medical school. And of course, that's where I saw the light and wanted to become a surgeon, and was exposed to some great surgeons. And when I look back, the picture on the bottom right is a buddy of mine and I who were both in medical school together. He's now an orthopedic surgeon. And, we wanted to think outside the box, and we wanted to do something different and engaging, and surgery was that space. And I will say, for probably most folks on this call who work in the surgical environment, being a surgeon already carries a lot of leadership traits. We have to own the OR, we have to own that patient's course. And it really places us as surgeons in a really great position to be leaders on a larger scale. In residency, I was exposed to the amazing mentors, and there's not enough time for me to talk about everyone here, but there is something that I learned from everyone, not just as a surgeon or as a clinician, but how they interacted with the health system, how they processed and facilitated their research projects. Pay attention to how people practice, how they carry themselves, how they lead, because you can pick up some amazing leadership traits from folks, even traits that you don't see in yourself, but you can learn to understand how they work, I think is valuable to you. I did my fellowship at Penn, again, exposed to leaders who also had, I think, the Penn environment, I think, is a little bit more of a global one. And it opened my eyes to societal work, which again was really neat to me. When you think about the impact that we have as a surgeon and the number of patients that we can touch, and you say, okay, well, I want to be an educator, and maybe I can touch more patients because of the people I teach. Well, I think if you can do societal work, you can reach even farther because you can change the way people practice. And that was one of the things that was really instilled in me during fellowship, that really, I think, opened my eyes to kind of the biggest picture, if you will, on a larger stage. I did return to Jefferson for a period after training. And at Jeff, as a junior faculty member, I really started to create my academic roadmap with my mentors. And I sought out folks And I sought out different mentors for different things. I had clinical mentors for different types of procedures, and I had an academic mentor for the type of research that I wanted to do, and folks who helped plug me in the medical school. I started to understand the administrative side of things. How does billing and compliance work and medical legal stuff work? Asking the questions, being present at the table when these things are being discussed just grows your armamentarium of understanding, because part of a leader is the qualities, but part of being a leader is having the skills and understanding of how processes work. And so that was really a tremendous growth period. For those who are still in training, you may learn a tremendous amount in residency, but I think when you're a junior faculty member, you've probably hit the steepest part of the curve in terms of becoming who you are. I returned to Penn on faculty, and I got involved in many things that I think helped shape my understanding of processes. I became the fellowship program director. I had to work with a multitude of stakeholders from the training paradigm, which many folks you guys all probably have, know these institutions, but really understanding how they function, why they have those functions, and how they interact together was, again, an extremely wonderful learning experience for me, to learn that professional level discussion within these different realms, and the processes and outcome metrics, understanding the data, and being able to give people the data that they need to kind of affect the change that you're looking for was extremely important, something I really learned well. Surgeons, we can be hard heads sometimes, but if you present surgeons with data, I think we all kind of acquiesce to data because, if it's interpreted appropriately, then it is what it is, and we need to make changes. So becoming fellowship program director was a wonderful experience for me. I also took over as section chief of surgical critical care, which really exposed me to a lot of health system infrastructure, reporting infrastructure, not just reporting now academically, but reporting to the health system and understanding corporate language, corporate metrics. It's not just about patient care, but there's the value aspect that is very important in corporate speak. And of course, the denominator in value is always cost. And that has been a very helpful thing in terms of being able to ask for things. You have to present that value argument. I've been able to grow and open up different ICUs, expand populations within critical care, including opening an organ donor management center in the last few years, which again has so many different components to it that give you that exposure to collaborate and really understand corporate infrastructure. I have tremendously learned reporting structure. Understanding organizational charts, I think, is also a big part of growth. Who does everyone report to? How do they all interact? And this is a little bit of a busy slide, and I don't want you to necessarily get stuck on all of the different names here, but this is just one role as an ICU administrator and all the folks that you're interacting with on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, to really do that role in an optimal way. So you need to know who your stakeholders are, and you need to engage them on a pretty consistent basis and have open communication with these folks as well. One of my more recent roles has been Vice Chair of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at Penn. And that has afforded me, several different roles to carry that lens with me in several different committees. I'm on the Promotions and Appointments Committee, the department's Executive Committee. These committees really have exposed me to how the different aspects of our world operate. And so although I'm there for a duty, I also look at every single one of these things as an opportunity to learn. And you don't have to get to the point of being a vice chair to be on various committees. In fact, when I look at fellow candidates, one of the things I like to see is that of their leadership inclination. Have they gotten themselves on various committees? It doesn't have to be, they don't have to be big, huge, fancy committees, but do they have an interest in learning how things work? Because I think that's, again, one of the great tenets of being a good leader. One of the other parts of that vice chair role have been the things that pop up every day in terms of issues and questions that people have. And they've been so far and wide in terms of different needs. And they have taught me a lot about working through what often are just communication mishaps, but also some professionalism things. And how do you handle that? When you learn to develop a temperament and a skill set to deal with various things that pop up like professionalism, I think that also just makes you a much, much stronger leader. I've certainly been involved in a bunch of societies, and I've hopefully worked with many of you in some of these capacities. But again, understanding how the bigger system works has been a fun aspect for me. And so my pathway has also been based on not just a very specific direction of leadership. In fact, if you ask me how do I get or choose the things that I get involved in, it's not because they have leadership attributes. It's because I enjoy them. I feel like I have something to contribute, but I also have something to learn that allows me to contribute more. And that's really been the stimulus for me to get involved on these multitude of levels, is what can I learn that's going to be fun for me? And then how do I contribute back in a meaningful way, which is also rewarding for me? And these are the things that, again, I think you have to be introspective of yourself as you navigate the different options that are presented to you along the leadership pathway. And then finally, I'm going to say you really just need to stay grounded. Do what's fun for you. Choose the things that are fun. I will always enjoy operating. I will always enjoy teaching and working with my fellows. And I enjoy, teaching on a much larger national stage and being involved in, the world that is around us that we need to be involved in as clinicians and as trauma providers. So with that, hopefully this was helpful. I look forward to Dr. Cow's talk and then the Q&A thereafter.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. That was wonderful. Rachel, do we want to try to give it one more go?
Rachel's going to get those slides up. Right before we start that, I just want to remind the audience to put their questions in the chat area so that we can go through the questions after the presentations are completed.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this panel, and many apologies for not being able to be there in person. I have no relevant financial disclosures, but I will say that none of the ideas in this talk are truly original, and many of these ideas can be found on the web. I will try to link these ideas to my experiences whenever possible. So the first myth is I can only lead from a position of authority. The corollary to this myth is that having a title is equivalent with having the authority and the resources necessary to lead. For some of you listening to this talk, you may be too junior or have been you may be too junior to have been appointed to any leadership roles. So annoying. Behaviors that help you to lead. Again, listening is so important. Sharing or communicating effectively and disseminating information. Keeping calm. I think the corollary to that is trying to keep emotion out of your decision making. Being honest and choosing the right moment to step up. I find that I use these behaviors now, even though I am in a formal leadership role, even more so than when I did not have a formal title. This is what I do when people come to me, and this is what I did even before I had a formal title. I think first and foremost, it's so important to listen. One of the things I have to do now is understand if people want my help to make change, or if they really just want a sympathetic ear and support. It's important, especially if you do have a formal role, but even so, if you are not a formal leader, you still have to remember that there are two sides to every story. I think it's very important to obtain data in all perspectives and to separate facts from emotion. I think that it is worthy to try to problem solve together. I think that it is incumbent on leaders not to try to give people solutions. I think brainstorming and empowering others to come up with ideas is important. I think you need to evaluate all the possibilities from different perspectives and when appropriate to solicit input and support from key stakeholders. If indeed you are not a formal leader and you are not the boss, you do need to engage people who are able to make the changes you need. So you have to be able to communicate up effectively. You need to frame the problem, provide the data, and have possible solutions if they want to hear them. I learned very early on never to go to my boss with a problem without a possible solution. Still, you need to be open to feedback, to alternative solutions, and to the idea that your boss may not actually want to accept your solution. If so, you should learn from these experiences. So myth number one is busted. You are able to lead, even if you are not formally the boss. However, I think you need to embody some of the same characteristics that you need as a formal leader. So myth number two, I don't have the right skills or characteristics to be a leader. I think many people feel this way even when they obtain a formal leadership role. And this really can lead to the idea of the imposter syndrome, or the feeling that one's success is not really deserved. When one looks in the mirror, sometimes one doesn't think that they are deserving of being a leader. So what exactly are the skills necessary to be a leader? Many people often classify them as hard versus soft skills. So hard skills tend to be tangible and measurable. They can refer to specific technical knowledge and are often acquired through hands-on experience and or training, such as those listed here: business administration, operations, budgeting. This list here is not comprehensive. Soft skills tend to be more intangible, and examples listed here include collaboration and teamwork, effective communication, time management, and critical thinking. Both types of skills are necessary to successfully perform and advance in healthcare leadership. So what if you don't believe that you have all of those skills? I think about doing a gap analysis. So in a gap analysis, you think about what is your desired state, you assess what your current state is, identify the gap, and then create an action plan of how you're going to get from your current to your desired state. So I think the hard skills are a little bit easier to have an action plan around because you can take courses, for example, leadership courses. You can get an additional degree like an MBA. As far as the soft skills, I think these are a little bit harder to obtain. One way to do so is through an executive coach or through other types of personality and style assessments. So I have had 2 executive coaches in my career. And the first time I had an executive coach, I took a battery of tests. This is actually from a test that my second coach had recommended. And you can see there the website. So with this type of personality test, you are classified as one of 9 different types in terms of your personality. As you can see, I'm a type 3 or an achiever. I suspect that this is a very common style for surgeons. You can also see that the test provides a description of not just my general characteristics, but also ways in which my type can be the best possible and ways that we can get in trouble. So these types of tests can help you to identify your strengths as well as areas for improvement. This is one of the tests that I took with my first coach. And you can see here that this is a coaching report for leaders. And in this assessment, certain characteristics were listed. And you can see here, these are some of the soft leadership skills. And so it lists my strengths as well as areas for development opportunities. I listed some of the action items that were included in the report, such as constantly soliciting feedback and suggestions from all stakeholders, direct reports, coworkers, team members, respected senior leaders, seeking opportunities to practice certain soft leadership skills, working with human resources, a mentor or a coach, and pretty much for all of the skills, it is important to have self-reflection. So I would say that there isn't a right or a wrong style to be a successful leader. I think it is less important to focus on an ideal prototype and more important to know your strengths and weaknesses. You really need to learn to leverage your strengths and to improve on your weaknesses. You really have to know yourself and your team. Often in taking over a new team, it is important to understand the styles of everyone so that you can function more effectively. Many effective teams use the tools that I've listed or other similar tools. The third myth is, if I don't have all the answers, then how can I be a good leader? In other words, I cannot be a good leader if I don't have all the answers. So that was actually my perception when I first took over as division chief, but now my perspective really has changed. I think that when leaders think that they have all the answers, it often means that they're not really listening to their team members, which significantly undervalues their team. Also, not embracing the wisdom of the team limits creativity and innovation. When leaders ask the right questions, they empower the team, they boost team morale, and they create a culture of learning. So what do you do when you don't have all the right answers? This article from Forbes lists 16 different suggestions. I tried to cluster them or categorize them for you. Really, they fall into three main groups. One is all about the team. You have to surround yourself with the right team, preferably a team with expertise in all areas or the important relevant areas. And then you need to empower them, give work back to the team, compliment, don't compete with your team, practice followership, meaning you don't always have to be the leader. And ultimately, you have to build trust with your team. The second category is cultivating a growth mindset and a culture of learning. It's important as a leader to be a lifelong learner and to always have childlike curiosity. It's important to have a growth mindset, to embrace uncertainty, to be willing to experiment, fail, and try again, and to let others do that as well, and to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Lastly, you want to inspire the answers. You need to ask questions that will inspire the answers. You need to think about and weigh different scenarios. You need to role model the behaviors that you expect from others, which includes admitting you don't know when you don't know, and to resolve to find out. And you might want to redefine what your definition of leadership is if you think you always need to have the answer. So I would say that this is definitely a myth. A good leader doesn't always have to have the answers and probably, in fact, should not always have them. Myth number 4, as a leader, I need to be infallible. As you see there, I'm pictured with an F. This is particularly something that resonates with me because as surgeons, we're all very high achieving and we probably have failed very little in our lives prior to becoming a surgeon. So surgeons tend to be high achieving and successful. And for the longest time in surgery, we told people that calling was a sign of weakness. However, I think that it is very important to own one's failures. After all, that is the premise behind morbidity and mortality conferences. And when leaders aim to cultivate success, failure is going to be universal. So again, I looked on the internet for suggestions for how to deal with failure as a leader. So here again is a QR code, again, for a Forbes article about owning and learning from failure as a leader. So first, as I already mentioned, know that failure is going to happen and accept it. Second, although it can be very, very difficult, you need to listen and understand when failure does occur and try to get everyone's perspectives around why it happened. Initially, we all want to deny that we're fallible. However, you need to accept it. This is very hard to do. Ultimately, you need to learn from it. Failure, but just to fail is not acceptable. Failing and learning from it is really the goal. You need to stay positive and think about it as a learning opportunity. Again, this idea of a growth mindset, and don't let failure define you. So I have had many failures as a leader. And I would say that, again, these are not novel concepts, but it is very important to own it and to say that you have failed, to admit it. I think it's important to be transparent because I think that your followers are going to have increased distrust if you aren't. And I think it's important, again, to learn and to commit to do better. You should not accept, even though failure is inevitable, it is important to also always try to be better. All right, myth number 5, the best teams are conflict-free. So in fact, when I took on my divisional leadership role, improving team function was one of the priorities. And it was a leadership myth that I had that the best teams are actually conflict-free. But we know that diverse teams, and I'm not just talking about race or gender, they're uncomfortable. They do increase conflict. But on the other hand, diverse teams are smarter, they're more creative, and they're more effective. Diverse teams drive performance. So how do you actually achieve this? Well, it's important to understand your team's modes for resolving conflict. So interestingly, when I started as division chief, I actually had my executive coach at the time administer everyone on the team this test here that you can see is a conflict mode instrument to try to assess what modes of conflict resolution they use most frequently. So I took the test as well, and we were all given a number of scenarios. And you can see here that, for example, in accommodating conflict resolution mode is highly cooperative, but not very assertive. On the other hand, a collaborating mode of conflict resolution is highly assertive as well as highly cooperative. So how did our team do? So not surprisingly, the most commonly used modes were compromising and accommodating. Okay, maybe it was a little bit surprising, but you can see that, again, an accommodating mode is very cooperative, but it's not very assertive. A compromising mode is midway between, in terms of an intermediate level of assertiveness, and it's an intermediate level of cooperativeness. However, really, we would hope that we would be collaborating. So where you need to actually work harder to come to a collaborative answer, where perhaps you don't just accept the obvious answer or just meet in the middle, but you actually try to understand the problem, dig deeper, and look for alternative solutions. So actually collaborating was one of the least used modes. Competing is very assertive, not very cooperative. And I was happy to see that was the least, also a least commonly used mode. Interestingly, when given percentages across for each individual in the team regarding how frequently they chose that mode for a scenario, the range was, as my coach said, the broadest he'd ever seen on a team. So really, I had my work cut out for me in terms of really trying to get our diverse team to work together. And I think that it's important to create a way to become collaborative. So surgeons are very strongly opinionated, and you are never, as a leader, going to have 100% agreement on every decision that you make. So how do you deal with negative opinion leaders? Oftentimes, this is really challenging when you're trying to implement change. And again, I found another article, but it lists 3 strategies. Excuse me. First, you need to ask questions to really understand why that opinion leader has such a negative view on the change that you're trying to advocate for. Secondly, you have to focus on the what and not the how. So is it that the opinion leader is really agreeable to the change, but really isn't on board with how it's going to be achieved? So really focus on the what. And lastly, you should involve these opinion leaders and really engage them. I would say that my main strategy is to really solicit actively the opinions of people who have contradicting views. And I think it's really important because if one person voices a negative view, other people may be thinking it, but they may be afraid to say those views out loud. And when you put these views out in the open, then you have an opportunity to think about them and address them. So I really actually think that the negative opinion leader is one of the most important people on the team. All right, well, so those are the 5 myths that that I wanted to share with you. And I wanted to leave you with a quote that was on the plaque when I completed my presidency for the Association for Academic Surgery. And this is from Eleanor Roosevelt. "We do not have to become leaders overnight. just a step up at a time, meeting each thing that comes up, seeing it as not as dreadful as it appears, and discovering that we have the strength to stare it down. So don't let misconceptions about leadership get in the way of you leading. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. I'm really glad we got that to work out. So everybody
Yeah.
gets that was wonderful. We have two questions from the audience. So the first one, it comes from Peter. Any suggestions for trainees or students? I'm a fourth-year medical student. I'm wondering what advice the panel would have for developing or focusing on leadership skills at the med student or resident level.
That's a really great question, Peter. I think the best advice I could give you kind of at this stage of your career is to just recognize that there are many possible pathways to a successful career. And the good news is that you get to pick what is a successful career for you. So I would say kind of work backwards from how you envision your career to look. You know, do you see yourself in a leadership position as hospital administration? Do you see yourself as a leader in, you know, resident education, fellow education, none of the above? And then kind of work backwards, you know, identify people who are in those roles and speak to them, and just recognize that, you know, even as an M4, even as a junior resident, you are now at the point where there are people that are junior to you, and you can give them advice working backwards, as well as kind of looking forward in your own career.
I would agree with that. And in fact, as I think about that question and the next question, which is what are the biggest mistakes or pitfalls that junior people or anyone really can make in stepping into leadership positions, and what words of warning would you give folks? I think it's kind of the opposite of what Dr. Flanagan just said. And I would say further, don't take on roles that aren't fun. I mean, being a leader should be something you enjoy. And, you know, as was stated, whether that's a teaching leadership role or an administrative leadership role within the health system, you know, you may not like having to lead a division, but you might really enjoy leading something on the health system side, like being a CMO or leading some type of service line. And I think at the end of the day, if you don't enjoy something, you're never going to do it well. And so I think the biggest pitfall is taking a role that you actually in your heart know you don't like, and you're just taking it for the title. If you follow your heart and you follow what's fun, I think you will always put your best foot forward. You will be super engaged to do that role well, which means you're going to learn it well. And I think not thinking about those tenets is probably the biggest pitfall that folks may make.
Yeah, I would say I stepped into that trap kind of early in my career. You know, I had received the advice, you know, don't say no to anything when you're first starting out, which I don't necessarily think is the worst advice if you have, you know, nothing that you're doing currently. Maybe it's not terrible advice. But then I ended up in all these roles that I just, you know, these were not serving me or anyone that that I have this particular role. And so then I was kind of able to start pruning them back to stuff that I just really love doing. And I think that made all the difference.
Wonderful. These two more questions. The next one comes from Tejal. This question is, any tips on how to manage the balance between managing up, keeping superiors happy, and managing down, keeping those who work under you happy, when you're a surgeon leader rather stuck in the middle?
I'll start with that one. And then I'm certainly sure that there are going to be different ways in which folks would approach this, really based on your leadership style. But, you know, I would approach that as, you know, not really looking at it as a tug of war, but really it's about managing expectations and providing data and insight so that everyone's really on the same page. And that is for your superiors and those who work under you. If you can provide data to everyone, you know, you can make the proper argument to those above you, and you can rationalize decisions to those below you. And everyone walks away with the feeling like, oh yeah, we made the right decision. This was just the way it had to happen. So I really try not to view it as a tug of war, but really how well can you craft your explanations and your communication ability to give folks what they need to hear so that they're all on the same page. And that is regardless of if they're above you or below you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have, institution-wide kind of a sense of what direction are we all going in together, because then you won't end up in that tug of war. If there's kind of a clear picture of where the department's going, where the hospital's going, then I think you have, it's not so much managing up and managing down. You kind of are all going in the same direction together.
Awesome. And the last question from Justin. I'm graduating fellowship soon. When should I seek an executive coach? And how do you balance wanting to take on leadership roles while your partners may want you to focus on being solely clinical, especially in the early stages?
Yeah, I think there's no wrong time to have an executive coach. I think I had one like my second year out. And I think, I think there's nothing wrong with being pretty clinical. Sorry, I've got my assistant here with me. I think there's nothing wrong with being pretty clinical your first year out. You're just trying to get your feet underneath you, honestly. I would say that was my most difficult year, even more difficult than anything I did in residency or fellowship. So I think kind of getting your feet underneath you so you know what to do at 3 o'clock in the morning is fine that first year out, truly. And then leadership roles just will start to present themselves to you. And then that's when you can start to decide, is this serving my goals, for the next 5 to 10 years or not? And then that's how you can decide to say yes or no.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think your mentors should kind of give you that roadmap and understand when is the right time to take on different things. It's hard to be a leader in a space that you might not fully understand as yet. And have that clinical base and that background, I think, is important. And so voicing your interests and your questions to your partners who are truly, there's a reason we call them partners, is that they really are partners in your career path and not just in your clinical practice, so that they understand what you're interested in. They can mentor you into when is the right time for these various things, and start to think about when do we open up specific doors for you to do things. So I think open communication with your mentors and your partners is a really important part of finding the right time to get involved in different things as those opportunities pop up, because there might absolutely be times where you may not be prepared for a role yet. And you may or may not know that, but you have to rely on those around you to kind of tell you when that time is. Hopefully your partners are, and part of that's also picking the right team, right? Your partners are part of your team, and they should understand your goals and objectives in a career and want to support you in that.
Excellent. Thank you so much to Dr. Howe and Flanagan. We'd like to thank you for attending today's professional development webinar. Flanagan, just a sec. Thanks. I'd like to remind you all to join us for our next professional development webinar, and we'll be sending you additional information soon. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.